We're at the World Economic Forum for Africa, year 2011, and we're talking about the shifts in geopolitical economic relations globally, the rise of the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now South Africa, building and fostering South-South relations, the tangible trade, economic, and human development benefits. Before the break, we were getting into a bit of a heated debate as to dealing with the past and China being the bogeyman and who benefits and who doesn't. We're being urged to look at the future and what the gains will be. I still want to continue being a little bit of a devil's advocate. On our panel today, Robert Lawrence, who's the Albert L. Williams Professor for Trade and Investment at Harvard Kennedy School. Also, Obiageli Ezekwesili, who's the Vice President for Africa at the World Bank. Colin Coleman is a partner and managing director at Goldman Sachs here in Africa. We also have the Minister Maitengwana Mashabana, who's the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation in South Africa, and also Minister Anand Sharma, Minister of Commerce and Industry in India. Ambassador Liu Guijin is also a special representative for African Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, People's Republic of China. And I'd like to start with you, Ambassador. Many people, when they look at China's involvement with Africa, they get nervous. They say China's just here to exploit the mineral resources of Africa. China offers loans and soft loans and very favorable terms for loans in Africa without considering broader human development issues. Basically, you're not doing things with a lot of goodwill.
Well, I think that fear about China is out of proportion, and it has no ground. Because China is not newcomer to Africa. Since the People's Republic of China was founded over 60 years ago, we started close relations by supporting African countries in their just struggle for independence. And since then, in so many decades, our policy with Africa has been consistent and visionary and strategically based. That is to say that when China helps Africa, and we help ourselves, when Africa develops and China benefits from that development, well, people normally, they usually mention about what they call to grab resources from Africa. But actually, resources or energy up to now remains the most advantageous commodities in Africa. I mean, China, in order to sustain, to support its development, we need to have a comparatively stable supply of energy, of minerals, and Africa has been one of the destinations for that resources. I don't think that is something evil, that is something bad, but what we have been doing with Africa and the structure of China's trade with Africa has no bigger difference with the structures of the continent's trade with all the other developed partners. For instance, with the EU, with the US, with a lot of development world, it's mainly for them to import minerals or commodities from Africa and export finished goods. I think Africa benefits from the revenues of the minerals. It's the African governments who can use the revenues to properly to diversify the structure of their economy. And we from China do not think that our trade structure with the continent is ideal, is that desirable. But that will take time to change. And for this, just for that, China has thought of all those measures which have been proved successful back at home. And we have opened 6 industrialized zones. We call it trade and economic cooperation zones. We hope that could serve as a kind of catalyst for the industrialization in Africa. We hope that industrial zones could help African countries in their manufacturing sectors and to create more jobs. That is what we are doing. The essence of China's Africa policy is for mutual benefit, is for win-win arrangement. So that's why I fully agree with remarks of the 2 ministers with regard to our relations between the BRICS, between China and Africa and the other developing world.
Obi Ezekwesili, your views here, I mean, I think the World Bank takes a holistic approach when you're in Africa. You are concerned about improving on infrastructure. You're also concerned about improving on the well-being of humans on the continent. Do you think these South-South relations are leading to that? Are we bridging those social inequalities, the more business we see coming in from Asia and Latin America on the continent?
I think that this is a work in progress. I think that a sense of the continent in entering whether bilateral relationships amongst these countries or in the case of South Africa being a part of a bloc and therefore our position in itself as more or less a representative of Africa in that bloc called the BRICS. In whatever form it is, defining exactly what economic interest you seek to serve yourself in that engagement is important. None of these countries are coming without a sense of the economic interest they seek to serve. I think that the most important thing that African economies need to do more and more is to provide themselves the kind of content and capacity with which they can get the best deals from whomsoever they are engaged in trade discussions. And I think that as more of the countries have embraced the idea that undiversified structure of economy would not lead to better improvement in standard of living of their citizens, that's why we're hearing more of them being interested in not just the macro level reforms that you see in the improvement in business environment generally, but also looking at sectors like agriculture, looking at the services sector in, say, tourism and real estate and the likes, and seeing what window of opportunity they've got in the relationship with these countries to deploy technology. I think that technology transfer has to be part of the conversation. I think that the whole thing about the rising labor cost in India and in China will ultimately be beneficial to these countries on the continent, and they must take advantage of that.
I'm glad you just mentioned that. Professor Lawrence, I want your views on this one, and me, I'll take you back to the past. In South Africa, we've seen an entire industry decimated by Chinese manufacturing and what they call dumping, textiles, in the Western Cape, right here where we're at. So when we say, let's talk about partnerships, let's not look at the past, let's look at this as a fraternity, that's very philosophical, that's very ideological. It does not speak to the bread and butter reality that ultimately we are in competition with the Chinese on labor, on production, on volumes. China's got the critical mass to produce cheaply, and we can't compete at that level.
Well, again, I think what you describe accurately depicts things that have happened over the last few years. But I don't think it's where we're heading. I actually think, as we started to hear reference to, labor costs are rising in China. China is changing its growth strategy to a more consumption-led path. And those global supply chains are starting to move out of China. And the real question is, where will those supply chains move to? Can Africa position itself to acquire some of those supply chains? So I would like to see our relationship with China, and I was delighted to hear the reference to the industrial zone strategy. I believe what we need in South Africa and in other African countries are the creation of, working together with our BRIC partners, industrial zones which will bring their know-how in global supply chains to Africa in order to supply their growing consumer markets. So again, it may well take us buying fabric from China, but we need to start by assembling the clothes to sell to them in order to get the scale to restore our fabric industry. So we have been living in the past, and we need to think about where is the global economy going, and is Africa and South Africa going to be positioned to take advantage of those opportunities?
Colin wants to say something, and then Obi. Shall we start with Colin?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think the allegation about China may make good television, may make good headlines, but frankly, the reality, if you travel around the continent, you go to a place like the DRC, Kinshasa, and you face a situation where their national budget per annum is $4 billion, and the Chinese are offering $9 billion, taking copper out of the ground and building infrastructure which they otherwise would never get the opportunity to fulfill. That is the reality that China is playing into. And so I think it's a very positive force in many places which otherwise would have no opportunity for development. The question, of course, is whether that is done in a way in which helps leave a legacy in those countries that is positive and sustainable. And I believe China hears that story. Repeating the allegation is not necessarily useful. The question is, how do we create partnerships across the countries, including South Africa and other countries, to build capacity to make that a sustainable development process.
I just wanted to pick up on the matter of trade between Africa and India, China, Brazil. It's important for Africa to actually walk through that same spirit of partnership to discuss the issues of the tariff barriers that their products have in these countries. Take a country like India. Tea and coffee is still 100% duty. And that essentially will limit the extent of the export from some of these countries to India. Or in the case of Brazil, you look at footwear products. That's some 35%. I mean, if you look at the rules of origin and you look at the problems of trade facilitation and the disadvantage that Africa has, if you're really discussing, and I was glad to hear your spirit of comradeship in economic matters, it would be good to have Africa sort of have the discussion with these countries in terms of how it conquers some of the tariff barriers that stand in the way of Africa being able to go beyond being a resource commodity supplier.
Both ministers want to rebut. Minister, you got something to say about what's just been said about India and some of the barriers?
You see, people have to realize, with due respect, that developing and emerging countries are also creating linkages and institutional arrangements. When it comes to tariff barriers, I think all our countries have a collective position in the global context to create a multilateral trade regime, which is rule-based, which is fair and equitable. And that's where we stand together. I think tea and coffee is a very minor example which you're giving, because I don't want to get into the commodities by name and the trade figures bilaterally with the countries. But the fact is that India was one of the first countries which took the initiative, not forgetting that we are 1.2 billion. We are not a rich country. 600 million live in villages. 400 million are poor. We have more poor people and more hungry people there. At the same time, look what India is doing. We have duty-free tariff preference for all the LDCs. 33 of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. You have Pan-African e-network project, where through Indian satellite systems, we have assisted sub-Saharan Africa to bridge the digital divide. It's a major leap in education telemedicine, where universities in Africa stand linked with universities in India. Okay. I have not completed. Also, please, Minister, we need to get other views. We also have hospitals in Africa linked with super specialty hospitals in India. And the entire projects are a gift of the Republic and the people of India. So let's not forget what we are engaged in. Only tea and coffee should not be used as an example, but you must look at the larger picture, and that's what I said with all respect.
Minister Ngwane Mashabane?
Don't get my brother agitated. India gave us a lawyer at the time when we were fighting for freedom. We sent back to India a very, very important export, a Mahatma, the liberator of India. I want to pick on the point of Lawrence and also of Colin, that times are indeed changing. and that there is a future out there for Africans, and that Africa is now part of globality, and we are no longer the dark continent that has been forgotten. We have become the third fastest growing region in the world. What do we need to do ourselves as Africans, supported by our partners in BRICS, not only South Africa, but broadly Africa? We need to look at the opportunity that we are. We need to start, and we are doing that, aggressively building on our infrastructure so that we can accelerate intra-trade. Africa is an opportunity for itself, for the 1 billion people that live in this continent, so that we can stop complaining about what others are not doing for us. Talking about dumping of textile products, China has become the textile factory of the world. They sell to America. If you talk to President Obama today, you hear the same kind of a complaint about how textile products are, all over in America. To round up my point, Lerato, we are welcoming this new excitement of investment in Africa into our infrastructure so that we can turn around this opportunity that has been a challenge of intertrade between Africans, which at the moment is still at 10%. We also want to say that BRICS is an opportunity, because what it brings with it is that we've been told in the past, as Lawrence had said, that governments must have nothing to do with business. But we've seen with all the BRICS or BRIC countries in the past that partnership between government and business has brought this phenomenal growth that we see. So South Africa has been confirmed by our policies of building a developmental state, working in partnership with our partners in BRICS.
Let's be solution-oriented now. Colin Coleman, 2 questions that I'm going to ask you. I'll start with the first. If we're going to turn things around, as the minister is suggesting, then South Africa has to develop its industrial base. And not just South Africa, Africa indeed. We have to develop a competitive advantage in manufacturing, because that's what the Asians are able to offer the world. That is not what we're able to offer the world at this juncture. What can be done to support it?
Okay, well, look, I think that to address a slightly but related point, what we're seeing is there's a major reorientation of corporate to corporate behavior. And that corporate to corporate behavior, in essence, as a combination of the indigenous growth of all these African economies and the support being provided by the South African companies, Indian companies, for example, Bharti buying Zain, establishing their headquarters in Kenya, the Chinese active all around the continent, very active in oil, very active through such as, for example, ICBC buying into Standard Bank, Discovery forming the relationship with Ping An in China on that joint venture, which is extremely exciting, that we were involved with. The Brazilians being very active in the Portuguese-speaking countries. You have a coincidence of activities which I think in combination is going to provide a very exciting support to the momentum. There really is a fresh breeze blowing in Africa, and it's a combination of indigenous and supportive activities coming in.
Ambassador Liu, what is China doing going forward to support Africans developing very sound manufacturing industries? You've got the expertise. How are you helping us with the technological transfer, the skills transfer?
Yes, I mentioned the industrial parks. This is one of the innovative ideas from the Chinese government. They are currently being built. Some of them have been finished. In addition to that, within the framework of FOCAC, that's China-Africa Cooperation Forum, that we have a number of concrete measures to support the manufacturing sectors. For instance, 2 years ago in Sharm el-Sheikh, during the 3rd ministerial conference of FOCAC, our government announced a fund which is $1 billion to support SMEs, small and medium-sized industries. This is one. And number 2 is that the Chinese government encourages Chinese business people to come to invest in Africa in manufacturing sectors. For instance, here in South Africa, And the investment from China is roughly $1 billion US. It's not only in mineral sectors, it's also in manufacturing sectors. And the cement factory, which is quite big, is going to be here, and also some areas. And also, the Chinese side encourages the Chinese companies to work hand in hand with the African companies to come into joint ventures. I think all these areas are to support the manufacturing sector. And also, we open our markets wider to the commodities and products of the African countries, particularly least developed African countries. Virtually almost all their products are enjoying tariff-free treatment by the Chinese customs.
Minister Sharma, I'm going to agitate you more, so I'll apologize in advance. Yeah?
You're not the first one, you won't be the last one.
We know that India's been very active, particularly in secondary and tertiary industries, manufacturing, ICT, media, communications, those kinds of things. But where there is a concern is in agriculture, because India is quite active in having an agricultural economy. Africa has that as its comparative advantage for most countries. The Doha round of trade talks almost stalled on the issue of subsidies for agriculture in Europe and America. And there's a lot of concern about whether or not we can partner on issues of food security as India and Africa. Solutions?
Well, India and Africa have been working together for decades for food security and in agriculture. There are very many projects in agriculture research, crop diversification, irrigation projects, where India has been through its assistance and lines of credit program, doing work in Africa. Many of the Indian corporates are present in the field of agriculture. There are institutional linkages. At the first India-Africa Forum Summit in April 2008, in addition to doubling the then existing scholarships in various professional fields, India created an additional stream of fellowships, scholarships only for agriculture, and they run into hundreds in Africa. Now, it is true that food security is a major challenge. It's going to be there in the next few years. Today, the world is confronted with the same challenge we were in 2008. Food inventories are low as in the 60s. Food inflation is threatening food security. Over 1 billion people today do not have adequate food. They go hungry to bed. Malnutrition in Africa, Asia, South America, in many countries. These are challenges, so we need to work closely together. We are self-sufficient in food, but we also get something from Africa when it comes to pulses, because pulses we eat a lot, but we don't have enough. Therefore, I feel that Africa has the potential. If some of the issues, particularly of transfer of technologies, issues of climate change get addressed, because there's desertification, there's 50 to 60% shortfall in the waters which Africa used to have to irrigate. All the major sources are getting depleted. Also, rain-fed agriculture, because of the changing climate patterns, is getting affected. So Africa and us, and for that matter, the countries of the world need to work closely together to ensure food security. And connected with that is the energy security. There are larger issues when we look at the Millennium Developmental Goals, because as I said, the countries of the South, we are still developing countries. China may be the largest exporting and manufacturing country today, but China also has issues of inclusive growth and sustainable development, and that's why our working together should not be seen as a challenge to anyone, as a competition with anyone. We may have bilaterally issues which are complex, but at the same time we feel the world is big enough to accommodate the rise and aspirations of all of us, and that should be respectfully acknowledged, because it is the rebalancing of the global economic order which would only ensure that it is equitable and inclusive.
Okay. Obi Ezekwesili, let's change tack a little bit and let's talk about how the emergence or the rise of the emerging market economies is going to change broader issues of global cooperation and multilateralism. South Africa is also a member of the G20 on its own merit, and we know the G20 has been very active in trying to find solutions post the credit crisis and recession, and there's lots of talk about a lot of things that need to happen. One of the most important being a reform of the IMF, for instance, and then, of course, the reforms of the Security Council. And it's believed that the BRICS will set the tone for those reforms.
Well, I think that those reforms have essentially started. At the World Bank, we now have a third chair from Africa, and the member of the board that represents that third chair is a South African. She used to be your deputy governor of your Reserve Bank. And that third constituency was a demonstration of the fact that the world is listening to that need to enlarge the space for the participation of 1 billion people that hitherto haven't had the sense that they had enough voice in global governance. The same sentiment is expressed concerning the UN, and that's working its way through. Over the end of the street where we are, there is the IMF, and they also have been working through their own governance to admit of more voice. And I think that, the advantage that Africa has is that we are embracing a multipolar world. And Africa is growing exactly at that time. And because it is growing at this time, its economic significance needs to be recognized, and it needs to be able to actually project itself as that place that will offer the world the opportunity that would have saturated in some other environments at some point.
Professor Lawrence, your views on this one. How will the BRICS change the dynamics, for instance, in the stall talks of the WTO currently? Issues around reforming the permanent membership of the Security Council, where at least China has membership, and there now calls for maybe South Africa, maybe India.
Well, I would first say that I think there is parity in the trading system, that in a sense that's an area where we have seen the governance systems change very dramatically. With the developing countries clearly being very strong players. In other areas, the easy part actually is representation. The hard part now comes for vision about what the world should look like. In a sense, we had global leadership coming from developed countries. The downside was perhaps many of the things they wanted to do, but the upside was that they could actually get things done. As we move into the multipolar world, what we've seen is impasse. Impasse in the trading system, unable to advance to a multilateral agreement. Impasse in the climate change agreements. So the real challenge now is for the BRICS to prove that they are able to lead the world, and in a sense to play a role in constructing a global system which reflects their vision. So that's, to me, the great challenge at the global level for the BRICS.
Ambassador Sharma? Minister Sharma?
Well, it's very interesting because what we have heard is an old mindset. So who's living in the past and who's looking at the future? That's important, Professor, with all respect. The world cannot remain frozen in an order which emerged after the Second World War. It's gone. The political architecture and the economic architecture must reflect the contemporary realities of the world, where you have 60% of the global economic output coming out of the developing countries and not having a voice in the global decision-making processes. The United Nations is the only body which can take decisions, particularly the Security Council, which impacts the countries of the world. Over the years, the powers of the General Assembly have been actually expropriated, swallowed into the Security Council system. And how can you call it representative and a global order in which the entire continent of Africa, the largest democracy on the planet, that's the Republic of India, entire South America is not represented? We are not going to accept an order where decisions are taken about us without us. And that's all what we are saying. Please make it representative. Please make it democratic. This was said after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. that we have moved into unipolar world order. Unipolarity is not something which the present world will have, because the world has to be multipolar. Africa is a pole. European Union is a pole. India is one of those poles. America, yes, is the largest economy, most powerful economy, military power, but that does not mean that China, Russia, and all of us do not have a role to play in the global affairs. Equally, our share in the other institutions. We are not countries which have benefited out of exploitation. We are countries historically who have been left behind for reasons which are better known in the great divide, technological divide, which came with the Industrial Revolution. Today, things have changed. We have also accessed technologies, and we will access more. Therefore, if we are going to contribute to more than 2/3 of the global economic growth, and that is something which is going to happen, then the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF and the World Bank, cannot remain the order they are. My question would be, world is still, you look at poverty, you look at Millennium Developmental Goals where we are, you look at the climate change negotiations. You refer to climate change. We had an interesting debate today. Now, Africa and India put together 2.2 billion of the world's population. That's more than 1/3, close to 40%. Africa contributes 4% to the greenhouse gas emissions per capita. India contributes 4%. Africa's electricity intensity is 1/13 as that of the developed countries. So who has created this situation? And those who have created, they must pay. The poor countries, countries like India and China, can innovate, can mitigate, can adapt. But the other countries must be assisted,
okay,
and that is all what we are saying.
We need to ask Minister Ngwana Mashabane for your views very quickly, please.
Well, very quickly, Lerato, I would want to say to fellow panelists that BRICS has come to confirm that multipolarity is going to be the order of the day, and backward we will never go. So therefore, we need to reform international institutions to respond to this new reality. But also to say that, as other panelists have said earlier on, BRICS is not here as an anti-something. It's here as a bridge between the divide between the North and South. But we are saying it's about time that we open the gates. We cannot continue to have, as Minister Sharma said, a United Nations Security Council that reflects 1945. Today, as we're sitting here, all members of BRICS are in the G20. All members of the BRICS are in the Security Council, albeit many of us for 2 years and out, but the contribution that we would want to leave and the legacy thereof would want to show that we would want to have been there to continue to make the contribution we are making, including Nigeria. South Africa is hosting UNFCCC 2011. Brazil is hosting Rio +20 2012. India is hosting Biodiversity Summit in 2013. So these are the kind of contributions that we will make to the world to make it a better place for all of us.